Have in the room for this one, we have Angela, who is chairing the session, and I'll introduce Angela shortly. Angela is joined in the room by Natalie Harkin, and then online we'll have presentations from Silvio, Carta, the Countess report, and Aidan Rowlingson. So let me introduce Angela. Thank you for flying in this morning. Great job. I'm glad that flight wasn't delayed. Yeah. Anybody who's tried to catch a flight anywhere lately will know that it's a little bit of a risk-taking activity as to whether you'll actually get off the ground. So great that you're here. So Angela is a writer, curator and director of Griffith University Art Museum, and she's also adjunct senior research fellow at the Queensland College of Art. She is current chair of University Art Museums Australia and a board member of Sheila, a foundation for women in visual art. Prior to taking up her position at Griffith University, she was curator, Australian art at Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Fiona, Tully and Penny. How wonderful to hear about your earlier life, Penny, as an objects conservator. That's amazing. And I'd also like to echo your acknowledgement of the Kaurna people and their elders past and present, and acknowledge that we're here during NAIDOC Week. Now we have a fantastic group of artists and designers here on this panel today to discuss the first thematic of the exhibition, which is data legacy. Now this theme reflects on surveillance practices, some through AI and other means, and includes artworks that push back on the ways that gathering data is increasingly instrumentalized. An important part of this theme of the show is that it reflects on the ongoing legacies of categorisation, of the ways that Indigenous peoples were and are surveyed, documented and categorised, and the ongoing effects of this misuse and misreading of data within our contemporary colony. I would point you to Kamilaroi artist and writer Warrabar Wetherall's excellent essay in the catalogue, which explores some of these issues. And also this thematic echoes some of what T. Uglo last night discussed in her keynote about the control and gatekeeping mechanisms of language. For example, Latin and the arcane languages of law that perpetuate, well, in her case where she was zooming us from 2,000 years of legacy still in our contemporary culture. But first, in terms of our presentations in this multimodal day, we have Silvio Carta, who's pre-recorded his presentation, as I have no idea what time it is in Europe where he is located right now. But just to introduce Silvio's work, he's an architect and artist, fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and head of art and design at the University of Hertfordshire. And he's the author of Big Data, Code and the Discrete City 2019 and Machine Learning and the City Reader from 2022. So those of you who haven't seen Silvio's work in the show, his work Machines Eye, How Machines See Our World, it's a video work displayed on a screen and presents us with a scene from a coffee shop, basically, with an overlay of data computations. These calculations are from a hypothetical AI system that scrapes information from smartphones, tablets, CCTV, sensors, and all of those parts of the Internet of Things that are embedded around us, and makes a calculation kind of overlaid onto these individuals that you're seeing in the coffee shop in real time, calculating their financial and social worth in terms of percentages. It's a really fascinating work, and Silvio here will talk to us a bit more through his presentation. So thank you, Silvio.
Apologies for not being there live with you today. Just want to talk a little bit about my work, the Machines Eye, which is an attempt to visualize, to illustrate how a hypothetical computer could, in a way, be sentient, so have consciousness of what's happening in the surrounding of that particular machine. So this work is it's an effort to try to imagine how our computer could actually use the senses the machines have. So that can be, microphones, that can be cameras, that can be a combination of data analysis from publicly available from the internet, but equally from social media, and any type of combination of information that or traces of information that we have online, to actually create profiles of people that are currently in a particular space. In this particular example, a coffee place. So this work is on purpose a little bit dystopic, because I wanted to show a little bit to an extreme how machines can easily, and with the technology that is available today, can do this. Not that computers do that, in a very direct way, but that's certainly a way in which things could happen if someone wants to program computers to do that. And again, we're not in the realm of truly intelligence machine, so it's just a simulation. It's a way to imagine how computers could, in a way, compete with human intelligence in a way. And I just want to, so hopefully you'll find this work inspiring somehow. And then the idea behind this work is that perhaps can inspire other people, that can let other ideas, the work emerge from this work. So I just want to give you a little bit of context to this work. And there are three lines of inquiry and research that I worked on so far. So the first one is about the interaction between physical and digital, and I've been doing quite some work in that aspect. So again, the idea that in the 80s and the 90s we had this lovely and probably naive idea that there was a physical world, the one that we all know and we experience through our senses, but it also then there was a digital version of it, where we try to at first kind of emulate the experience or replicate the experience that we have in the physical world. So you had this kind of almost a dichotomy between the physical experience and the digital experience. So digital world, the physical world. However, the more we go into our time, the more we get close to our time, the more we see that this distinction is actually blurred. So there is no any more digital versus physical experience. Is more about a combination. And probably the latest example of this is the metaverse. If you think about the metaverse, is a space, it's a digital space in effect. Technically, it's a digital space where designers and artists are actually creating a new space for people to experience almost physical elements of design. So playing with gravity and playing with the quality of light and the quality of all the qualities that they are traditionally physical, but then you want to experience them in a physical way. So the second line of inquiry, it's about the interaction between human and AI, artificial intelligence, and then the usual line of work that it's depicted in science fiction, design fiction work, where you have this kind of black box artificial intelligence that it's almost competing with human intelligence. But actually, most of my work is, especially in design, is producing AI projects, AI apps, where I basically use AI algorithms to design buildings, to design space. So there is nothing magic about it. There is nothing surprising about it. Once you get through this idea of this kind of vague idea of black box, then you get into some more transparent idea of AI. Then you know what's going on behind the scenes, and then you can appreciate a little bit better this relationship. And the final really point I want to make today is about the importance of looking, for all of us, designers and artists, to look into the automation of intelligent systems. That's something that goes a little bit beyond the the traditional idea of AI versus humans and robots versus human. So autonomous systems are anything that automate things that we do, from automatic, we all know this example of the credit score where an algorithm somewhere in a server is deciding whether I'm worth of a mortgage or not, or whether determined by kind of premium insurance based on number of factors that can be anywhere from my postcode to the job I currently have. So these I want to kind of stress 3 lines within this, which is obviously the ethical implications of the autonomous systems. Is the extent to which we attribute rights to autonomous systems, is the usual question about, do robots have rights? And if so, what type of rights? Are they equal to humans? Are they not? And the final one is really, it's about, which is what I'm involved more recently, it's about finding, together with other colleagues, it's about finding trade-offs between ethics elements and other elements, things like safety, things like quality of life, and things like that. So finding these trade-offs and this kind of the right balance between different, sometimes competing elements within the domain of intelligence and automatic system, it's very difficult for us as humans. And so these are kind of, I hope you enjoyed kind of this branching off ideas that I put there for you. And then I'm looking forward to a discussion with you anytime soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Silvio. And I just think that work is so fascinating. And as he says, the work it's not even a glimpse into the future. This is the current reality of what is possible using the technologies that we currently have, and the dangers and the implications if we don't administer these systems responsibly. So that was a fascinating presentation. And next up, we have the Countess, also joining us online through Zoom, I think. So the Countess, just to introduce them, is a collective made up of several individuals. And today I think we have with us Elvis Richardson, Amy Previch and Miranda Samuels. Now, every 4 years since 2014, the Countess Report has published nationwide data on artists, exhibitions, art prizes, staff and acquisitions across the categories of state and university art museums and galleries, artist-run organisations and commercial galleries. Now, data has allowed them to critique and analyse gender representation in the Australian visual arts sector. Their practice also has some analogue outcomes as well as the Countess Report, and one of those outcomes is the very elegant work which is included here in the Flinders iteration of the exhibition, which is 11 bronze commas hung very simply on the wall. And these conceptually represent the data categories that Countess Report collects, which is namely name, date, role, gender, date of birth, place of birth, gallery type, gallery name, exhibition title, exhibition type, and highest education. So we will at some stage go and see the show, but today we are going to hear from Countess about the projects. Thank you so much, Countess.
Well, this is Elvis speaking. My name is Elvis, and I'm speaking from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. And thank you for having me here today. I'm speaking here with Amy today. Miranda, unfortunately, couldn't join us due to, complications. So she sends her apologies. And, so I just wanted to start off a couple of points that we've been discussing in preparation to speak today. And just to kind of say the basic drive of Countess initially and still today is to use the quantitative, the unemotionalness of data to question how art is qualified as important, I suppose. So even though our data isn't qualitative, we're using amounts, we're kind of using representation and how that gets you know, how that the makeup of what we get to see in our galleries and museums is constituted. So, and I guess we're all artists in Countess, so, you know, we've been trained in, you know, looking and seeing and techniques of observation through whatever our medium is. And, you know, it was, you know, easy to kind of translate those skills into a data kind of situation when we're also kind of so educated with that in terms of our media and how we, you know, take on information. So Countess data is actually collected by hand. You know, we visit the websites of every gallery and museum, and our team of counters record line by line each artist and their artwork that's been exhibited or acquired. And those other categories that Angela was mentioning as well. So in most cases, we can tell gender because globally individuals are named in such a way that identifies their gender. But if this is not obvious, we can have to continue our search through articles or references, usually online, to achieve that. And since 2017, we've been recording gender diversity, or as diversity as much as we can in our reports using that same method. And I know Amy's going to talk a little bit about that. But I just wanted to kind of hark back to something, you know, the Don't Give Up My Day Job economic study by David Throsby and Virginia Hollister that looked at a range of creative careers. And I'll move on to the next slide, actually, if I can. I don't know how to do that. I'm clicking, but it didn't do anything. Okay, thank you. And that what was of interest to us at Countess, that, you know, they looked at a lot of creative careers, musicians, theatre, film and things like that. And while the majority of the creatives ranked education as being important, visual artists ranked it as essential to becoming a professional visual artist. And, you know, from a data perspective, we could look to museums and the data around the, you know, if our state museums and the artists they're exhibiting and collecting, we could quantify that the majority of them had done a visual art degree of some kind. So the pool of artists that, you know, is generating the professional artists in our system are kind of being harvested out, or not harvested, they've been grown in our cultural institutions. And so this idea of that being the pool of artists was of interest too, because obviously you could make a direct correlation between, you know, well, if only 75% of, or, you know, 34% of artists exhibiting in museums are women, but 75% of, you know, visual art graduates are women, well, you know, there's a disparity there. So I think I've lost my point that I was trying to make, but I think it was about using quantitative data and like our methods of just, you know, being very analog in a way and kind of, you know, hand harvesting the information rather than scraping it or AI being involved. It's very personal. That we were somehow like making and questioning the idea of quality, quantitative data in terms of what was quality or an important art. So they're my 2 points, and now I'm going to hand it over to Amy to continue that our conversation around. Thank you.
Well, as Elvis and both Angela mentioned, my name's Amy Presowich. Hello. It is great to be here with everyone today. I'm speaking from unceded Gadigal land in the Eora Nation, and I too would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So rather than run through all of the report findings from 2009, which some of you may have already seen, and if not, you can find it online, I wanted to speak about the 2019 Countess report in the context of surveillance. And it was really interesting compiling this talk through that lens, because it was the first time that I think any of us had thought about our role as surveillance. Often we use the word accountability, and that slight shift created I think a more analytical way to think about the things that I'm about to share. So the intention of all the reports has been to chronicle changes in gender representation in the Australian visual arts sector, and with the goal being to inform and influence systemic change through data collection and analysis. But when I think about that through the lens of surveillance, I think that, to put it in another way, to chronicle change is also for the Countess to surveil institutions. I wonder what's happened with the slide. It seems to have gone back. Oh, great, it's the green slide now. So the last report, which covered 2018 exhibition data, was backed by NAVA, the National Association for Visual Arts, and also financially supported by Sheila, a foundation for women in visual art. And the data was collected, as Elvis mentioned, manually through the labour of Elvis, Miranda, myself, along with a team of counters, and also the wider arts community at community counting sessions at a variety of galleries and residencies throughout Australia. And so in effect, I think that Countess has demonstrated that there's quite a power in creating a community of people and organisations who collectively surveil the art world. So yes, for the last count, we manually, it's kind of amazing when you think about as, the word manual, when we're doing it doesn't seem so wild, but actually to say that we counted over 13,000 artists across 184 institutions, and almost all of the data collected, as Elvis mentioned, was from publicly accessible data found online and on artists' websites. And I think what this surveillance found, and what we can know, because Countess is an ongoing surveillance project, was that some parts of the sector had very significant improvements with, for example, commercial galleries exhibiting 22% more women artists in 2018 than in 2014. But, great. Thank you, the slide did work on. But the representation of women slightly decreased in state galleries and museums from an already unfavourable 36 to 33%. And I'll come back to that point later. But what we're also thinking about when we collate this data is surveilling the complex power dynamics in the art industry. And that's something that we're really looking forward to exploring in our upcoming report. And so for the first time, we included the category of non-binary artists. So we now have a benchmark for non-binary representation within the sector. And that methodological approach was supported by the work and the research of Archie Barry and Spence Messer, and their publication, Clear Expectations, Guidelines for Institutions, Galleries and Curators Working with Trans, Non-Binary and Gender Diverse Artists in Australia. And I think that this is also emblematic of Countess turning back on ourselves and having the art community surveil us. And it's a recognition of what Countess needs to acknowledge as necessary changing methodologies, which I think is really aptly put in an essay by Archie Barry, which I've included a segment of here. If you want to map a shifting terrain, you need a very flexible cartography. And I don't think that surveilling institutional data necessarily has to sit in this really heavy realm of uncomfortable institutional conversations. I think the counterbalance of Countess data is that it provides a really fruitful starting point to work quite productively in order to shift shift ideological scaffolds that might exist within organisations. So during the time that we were compiling the 2019 report, Countess became a cultural partner to Know My Name at the National Gallery of Australia, which was an exhibition and also a suite of programs and initiatives that celebrated all women artists in Australia. And the NGA used data from the Countess report as an impetus to create a gender equity action plan, which champions gender equity through their whole organisation. And I think it's for reasons such as this and the NGA's interaction with the Countess data or surveillance that I think, well, we all think, I think Elvis, Miranda and I think that performing the ongoing act of surveillance continues to feel really integral to keeping the art sector accountable. And thank you. That's all I have to say on the matter today so far.
Thanks so much, Amy. That's fascinating to hear about the evolution of the Countess's project and these interesting ways that it has re-examined itself and then adjusted in terms of every single count. But at the very base of the project is just the simple presentation of the data, which remains very elegant and beautiful in its simplicity and in calling all of us institutions to account. So thank you so much. But next we have, in real life, in the room with us, Natalie Harkin. Now, Associate Professor Natalie Harkin is a Narungga woman and activist poet from South Australia. She's Senior Research Fellow at Flinders University here with an interest in decolonising state archives, currently engaging archival poetic methods to research and document Aboriginal women's domestic service and labour histories here in South Australia. So Natalie's title is Archival Poetics and Colonial Surveillance. And Natalie, your work just resonates so soundly with so many of the themes of the data imaginary. And this particular work explores archival poetics as an active and embodied reckoning with history and the violence of the colonial archive, particularly state policy measures targeting Aboriginal girls for removal into indentured domestic labour, and this triggers questions about data collection, surveillance, representation and agency. So thank you, Natalie.
Thank you so much for the introduction and thanks for having me, Tully and Fiona. I feel like a bit of a ring into this exhibition. I'm not actually in the exhibition, but my work was in a recent exhibition at FUMA, the previous one, Sovereign Sisters, curated by Ali Gamilia Baker and Maddie Rees at FUMA. I'm a Narungga woman. I born and raised, living, working, loving, creating on Kaurna country. I owe so much to my Kaurna community and Kaurna country and all of the archives and the landscape that surround us and the country that we are situated here on at Flinders campus here on Bedford Park, being on the body of the giant Nanu, who was the one of the great heroes in Kaurna culture and Kaurna story, who named a lot of the places in and around Kaurna country here. We have a beautiful vantage point of the plains up here, so we can see what Uncle Lewis O'Brien, our esteemed Kaurna elder and Kaurna elder on campus, talks about the wetlands in the sky, the Milky Way being the wetlands in the sky, reflecting all of the tributaries and rivers in and around all through the plains and all the creeks and tributaries. And that there's also no word for horizon, that when the sea and the sky become one, it is about becoming one and that togetherness. And in the spirit of togetherness, he gifted us some of that Kaurna philosophy and the words to Flinders campus. So I just want to acknowledge Uncle Lewis. I wasn't raised on country. I was at Narungga country. My nana was removed from Point Pearce, Point Pearce Mission Station on Narungga country, where she was confined and contained with all of her family and under immense control and surveillance from the state under the Aborigines Protection Act. So when I think about data imaginaries and this idea of fears and fantasies, all of the surveillance files, we know about the fears and also the fantasies, the colonial fantasies of the Aboriginal person, the Aborigine, and those colonial fantasies have been sustained, produced and sustained on the colonial archive in particularly violent ways that have manifested on our bodies, on our families and our communities, and controlled us in very oppressive ways right across the country. So I've been quite obsessed with the archives for a really long time. I wanted to show you, this is actually a series of video stills when I went into State Aboriginal Records to do some research on our family back in, I think this one was around back in 2010, 2011. So Andrew Wilson, he's a Ngarrindjeri man working in the state records for about 30 years now. He's about to retire. And Andrew Wilson was very helpful, as he always is, to any Aboriginal person who comes in and says, I've got some family names or an event or a key point in history that I want to research. And so this was from, you can see the top right-hand corner, that's just from one search on one family name in state Aboriginal records. And the files on our family are intense, and it's not that my family were anyone, particularly special. It was just what was happening around the country, and what was and so looking at these archives was incredibly overwhelming. I felt like it's very confronting. They're not easy files to navigate. In fact, all of these archives and repositories in various institutions and collections can be really difficult for Aboriginal people to navigate and enter, but I feel like we must go into them in order to transform out of the fixed imaginings of who we are and also how we perceive ourselves. There's a lot to find out about our own history, but particularly the history of the state. So putting the spotlight back on the colonial state is what I was really interested in. But I left, I had a look at the archives, I left and I went home, and Julie Goff was my supervisor at the time, incredible, prolific, amazing Aboriginal artist from Tasmania, good friend, and she was my associate supervisor with my PhD. And I went home and said to my partner, what would Julie Goff have done? What would Julie Goff do? So I went back and I said to Andrew, look, I need those files again. He was really angry at me, but he got them out, and I just had this terrible little camera that was my kids at the time. I didn't have an iPhone back then, and just put it at the end of the table and filmed myself packing up the records. And it goes for about 15 minutes, and I've overlaid that with some poetry called The Ode to the Board of Anthropological Research, because I was also looking at South Australian Museum archives at the time. So this is a series of video stills of packing up those archives. As I said, the surveillance is overwhelming. The body of records that I had on my nana, also from the children's, this is from the Aborigines Protection Board, but there's also an incredibly large file that is also on my nana from the State Children's Welfare Department as well. So, and in those files, if we just want to skip to the next slide if possible, I don't know if anybody's controlling that. Yeah, and that's a video still from the basket, which I have here. I'll just take it out if you want to. So this is a basket I wove from my nana and my great-grandmother's letters, and this was installed in the Sovereign Sisters exhibition. So this basket, and if you want to if we can play it and just put it on video loop while I'm talking as well, with the sound down, if that's all right. There's a poem that's on top of this one too called Whitewash, Brainwash, referring to the domestic service files. You can see washing up, aprons, good girl, and there's lots of information from the letters, and I wanted to take the letters that were written by my nana and my great-grandmother out of those files, those surveillance files, and do something a bit more honouring and liberating of them. But I've just realised I'm not really talking much about what I intended to talk about, but just thinking about how data was instrumentalised. So the state is a really interesting relationship between these scientific experts on our families, particularly through the Board of Anthropological Research, but also who also sat on the Aborigines Protection Board. So it was a really interesting biopolitics relationship with state between the Board of Anthropological Research and the Aborigines Protection Board, and each groups of experts, all white men, were sitting on each other's boards and management, and they were the ones who controlled policy that impacted and directly influenced and controlled our lives. And when you get into the archives, you can see this. You can see these instruments of surveillance and the tools that they used to determine what we did, where we moved, who we lived with, whether we could get blankets, food, rations, etc. The letters in the archives from our families advocating for better conditions, a testimony to the resistance, resilience and activism of our families that did not passively accept the conditions of state that were imposed upon them. And these letters are incredible. So these are some of the letters that you can see that have been woven into this Ngarrindjeri basket and filmed by Ali Gamilia Baker and installed in one of our exhibitions from the Unbound Collective. My family were at Point Pearce Mission Station when the Board of Anthropological Research literally set up camp, and that's what they did. And they talk about it as setting up camp to take hair samples, body measurements, blood samples, photographs, and collecting other data on our people. And this data is collated and sent, including human remains as well as other collections from the museum, and that these collections of data are in museums all around the world to try and work out what to do with, particularly in 1913, there was a Royal Commission in South Australia, what to do with the Aboriginal problem, the half-caste problem. So we're particularly fixated and interested in eugenics and physical and cultural anthropology on our bodies and what to do with us and how to solve the Aboriginal problem, and hence that was informing state government policy and the key assimilation measures, particularly targeting girls. So that then took me into the next phase of my research, looking at the very gendered and racialised intimacies of state and the gendered, racialised intimacies of the mundane everyday. And when I talk about the mundane everyday, I'm talking about the inspectors, the state ladies, the police, whoever it was that were tasked with the job of going into people's homes and checking out the conditions of whether Aboriginal people and children in particular were deemed to be neglected or destitute. These ideas of neglect and destitute were actually, people were poor. So poverty, as was found by the Royal Commission into the removal of Aboriginal children from their families back in 1997, that report, poverty does not equate neglect, but that is what our families were charged with, were neglect and destitute, the legal charge, and that was the terms for children being removed. So we had data cards, genealogies, photographs, artefacts and human remains that were taken from us and put into institutions to try and work out who we were. So the Ode to the Board of Anthropological Research in the original poem, from the previous slide, was really a comment on you can never know her fully. It was about my nana. So you can name her, you can claim her, but you'll never know her fully. John Cleland was, Professor John Cleland was part of the Board of Anthropological Research. He was the chief blood group, or bleeder, as they called him, and collected blood on our families. But what was really important about the work that he did that influenced our lives was that he was instrumental in extending the medical data card system and the physical data card system, which was this incredible page just full of files that people had, the anthropologists filled in with immense data, right from the bridge of your nose, the shape of your tongue, just incredible physical features. But what he did was he extended and advocated for the extending of that physical data sheet and data cards, which are all kept in the museum, to include social data, and has, as he said in his own words, including mental ability, willingness to work, tidiness in the home, offences against the law, work and wages earned from time to time. In fact, he says, all matters which may assist in the summing up of a person's activities, both those favourable and unfavourable. This social data card system was then used by inspectors, or state ladies, as my family called them, the state ladies coming into the homes and making those assessments using that social data based on those colonial fantasies that had been sustaining these ideas and perpetuating this idea of the Aboriginal problem from the point of first contact. So I'll just finish up pretty much, I think. Have I got, how many minutes have I got? 1 minute? Okay, so I'm looking at the domestic service files. I've been looking at these state records, Aboriginal women's domestic service files. I've got files from 1907, the annual domestic service files reports. Incredible data in these reports on, and the voices represented in these archives are incredibly powerful. But the very first file I've got them from 1907 to 1945. The very first file, I just wanted to read out to you, Aborigines Office file number 57 of 1907 on the 31st of January. The subject of the file is Aboriginal women unwilling to leave mission and take domestic service outside. It's very concerning. So this was a letter to the Protector of Aborigines at the time, respectfully submitting that I fear the condition of things at this mission station as to the native girls going out to domestic service will require some special legislation to deal with them. There seems no chance of getting any of the native girls to leave the mission. It would be an advantage to us and much better for themselves if they would go out to domestic service, but they're unwilling to take it on, which is most unfortunate. To deal with the ever-increasing number of half-caste boys and girls, it may be necessary to alter the rules and regulations now in force. On present lines, we couldn't go on like this forever. That was from the superintendent. Now, what came out of that was special legislation indeed, which was targeting the girls for removal into indentured domestic labour. And when I say indentured, I mean forced, without consent, and often with all of the incredible rules and regulations on where they went, if they could come back to their families. And one of the best things in these records is the strength and agency of families and parents and extended families fighting very hard to have access to their daughters, saying, we know our daughters better than you, the Protector, very brave, because there was punishment for the girls then were not allowed to go back for Christmas. Some girls were taken away into service for 3 years without permission to go back home, despite their requests and the requests from family. So this grand unfolding narrative is based on so much data, which I could go on forever about, but I won't. I can't, but I can because I love it. These are the records. This is the paradox of the archive. They're the records that I love and I hate, and I'm always compelled to enter them. But in order to transform out of them, for me, the only way was to write poetry and weave my way out of the archives. And honour them in different ways. So that's all I'll say for this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Natalie. It's beautiful. And I love your storage, very elegant storage solution there.
The cake box. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Julie Goff was always very upset with me for this. She says, where's the proper archive box? She doesn't like it that it's in a cake box.
Very wonderfully resonant work, Natalie, with the themes of the exhibition. It's just incredible. So thank you. And our final speaker today is joining us online. We have Aidan Rowlingson, who is an artist included in the exhibition. Aidan is a proud Bachelor man who's dialing in here from Meanjin, Brisbane. And we've got a couple of slides as well, and we're going to discuss the research that led him to create the work 660, which is a tangible and very direct response to the Queensland Museum's repatriation processes. So, Aidan, are you joining us online?
Hello.
And we will, excellent, great to see you. We'll get your presentation loaded up as well. And also, I do have to warn Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the audience that this presentation includes images of a deceased person. So, Aidan, perhaps you could do a bit of an intro of yourself to us, if you like.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aidan Rowlingson. I am coming into you live from Cubby Cubby Country. I'm currently at my mum's place, and she is in the middle of building a house, so I am currently sitting in a caravan on her property. But luckily she has Wi-Fi, so, you know, can't be too bad, right? My background is, my degree is in acting and performance, actually. And I mainly work in entertainment management and producing live events. I'm a Bachelor and Cubby Cubby man. Did I say that? Party.
Great. Thank you so much, Aidan. And you've got a few slides, and we're going to just discuss some of these, beginning with the work. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I cannot see the slides. I've got a click, but
our technical team will resolve that directly.
Great. Sorry.
No worries. Maybe you could start by describing the work that's in the show, Aidan, 660 from 2018. Could you describe it physically for us, perhaps?
So 660 is a large necklace sculpted from polymer clay, depicting 660 skulls. Hand sculpted, and that's to represent the 660 ancestral remains that were in the Queensland Museum at the time.
So it was featured in part of a Digi Youth Arts, Visual Arts showcase in 2018 out of their Unsettled project. Had you come to that project as a visual artist, Aidan?
No. So I was in my last year of uni and quite bored, and I was looking for something to do outside of uni. And so my mum actually sent me a link to Digi Youth Arts for their theatre program. And so I was like, oh, sweet, I'll do that. And so, I originally joined on the theatre component of the Unsettled program, which was in partnership with Digi Youth Arts and the Queensland Museum. So Digi Youth Arts was in residence at the Queensland Museum. And the Unsettled program kind of looked across like visual art, theatre, street art, and music. It was all in response to the Queensland Museum and museums in general and cultural institutions as a whole.
So Digi Youth Arts is a kind of interdisciplinary, youth-led group who do all sorts of different projects. How did they approach the museum? How did they get the museum to kind of open up? What was that kind of interface like?
That's a really good question. I think Alicia Beatson had a lot to do with that. Her reputation is as someone who kicks doors down. So I think it had a lot to do with Alicia Beatson's ability to kind of just swing doors wide open. And then I believe she was kind of working within the museum as part of her studies or something like that. I'm not completely sure on the detail, but Alicia Beatson, who is artistic director of Digi Youth Arts, had a lot to do with that. And also the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workers within
focus
the
group or
really were like kind of our champions, I think, with like navigating throughout the archives and within the museum, and like really providing the space for young, impressionable Indigenous youth to kind of like wrap their heads around like the kind of like Goliath that is museum.
And to ask very direct questions about the facts and the data contained within those spaces. So returning to the work itself, Aidan, what led you to think about making this work as a body adornment piece?
Yeah, so I guess it was just one of those process things where I kind of knew the content I wanted to respond to, and that was just repatriation as a whole. And I originally had this other idea, and it was just like way too complicated. It was not me, and I was not vibing my own idea. So it kind of like transformed after I really like I spoke to one of the workers within the museum there who kind of worked around the collections really. But yeah, I just asked the question quite simply of like, here's a list of questions, can you just give me like the simplest answers? I don't want to take up too much of your time. And yeah, the question was, how, if you can tell me, if it's culturally safe for you to tell me like how many ancestral remains are in the museum. And so 660 came back, and I was like, that's crazy. I don't know why, but like once I kind of heard that number, that I was just like, wow, that's a lot. And like nobody really knows that. So I think like the way I kind of came to it was just trying to find the simplest way to kind of capture that information. I didn't want to put too much of like a flair on it or anything. I think that number itself is like all the power of the work.
Absolutely, and confronting. And so you molded these beads out of just a very easily accessible molding clay, like a craft clay, 660 individual beads for the neck piece. How long did that take, and what was that? That's kind of almost an endurance kind of process in itself, Aidan?
Yeah. And I think about it, and I think at the time too, the thing that really was helping me through like the repetitive process, because was also the fact that I think a lot of Aboriginal artwork is quite a repetitive process. Having dabbled in weaving and dot painting, it's quite like your focus has to be on that, I feel. And so, yeah, the other thing that kind of like was getting me through it was as I was like making these skulls, and each of them kind of took like a different shape as I was kind of like getting through them kind of thing. I was really like kind of like, I was almost like talking to them in a strange kind of way. I was like kind of coming up with like just like what their face shape would have looked like, if these skulls had flesh, and what they would have looked like and who they would have been kind of thing. And it was quite, I don't know, it was quite interesting because obviously I'm trying to like pump them out. And I think I like averaged like 1 a minute or something like that. And so yeah, it was just like saying hello to someone and then like putting them down, kind of saying goodbye at the same time. So that was a really kind of like interesting process. And I think like my background in theatre, where the process of the art is but before you even get on stage, it's like giving meaning to every little word, giving meaning to every little moment, and whether the audience picks up on that, or, you know, whether the audience knows that the character just came from morning tea onto stage kind of thing, whether that's explicit or not, like, you know it, and it kind of like helps the process of kind of creating the artwork. So I think that's kind of how that process went.
You're describing an incredibly embodied process, really, in terms of constructing the work. Yeah. And there was a musical component to the project as well. One of your collaborators on the DigiYouth Arts project actually composed a musical piece to accompany the work. Is that right?
Yeah. So my work was in response to repatriation, and Rudy Matoy, a phenomenal musician, singer, wrote a song as part of the Ancient Bloods, which was like the band. The Ancient Bloods is a interchangeable Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander band that kind of like works within DigiYouth Arts. And so Rudy wrote the song Boogeyman, which I would describe it as in response to repatriation, both through like ancestral remains and cultural artifacts, and kind of sending those back to country and taking it out of the hands of the boogeyman, that kind of thing, like the idea that,
I'm hoping that we might be able to play that track.
Incomplete of ceremonies, broken traditions lead to lost families, untold of the history, an ignorant society of our spirituality. Tools and weapons taken from its true country, just to be used for that thing people call money. We want it back to that beautiful land. So there's nothing for that boogeyman, nothing for him, nothing for. We want it back to that beautiful land. So there's nothing for that boogeyman, nothing for him, nothing for him. Politicians saying sorry, but we still grieve when they celebrate their history. Nothing for him, nothing for. We want it back to that beautiful land. So there's nothing for that boogeyman, nothing for him, nothing for him. Now we got to let you know how culture's gonna stay strong. The artifacts you still don't belong. You know that it will for that boogeyman, nothing for him back to that beautiful land. So there's nothing for that boogeyman, nothing for him. Ooh, nothing for that boogeyman, nothing for him. Thank you.
Wow, Aidan. So, as you describe, phenom. Yeah. Are you able to, okay, maybe just, we're running out of time, but I just wanted to flick through
Screen share.
backwards a little bit. Yeah. As you're screen sharing, maybe you could just flick through back to that image of your ancestor that you were talking about in terms of relation to, okay, so here's the work, but can you talk about the way that you discovered these images, Aidan?
Yeah, so working on another project, which was for like a playwriting workshop. Part of that project was to go to the State Library of Queensland after we had given them like family names and a bunch of information, and stuff like that, and they kind of did a pull from the archives, and we got to like go into a big room with the white gloves on and kind of go through what they could find. And some images that came up were these images of what is, as far as we know, a Butchulla ancestor with, I believe, direct ties to myself. I have direct ties to her. Yeah, and so it was quite interesting that after I had made the work, probably like a year or two after I had made the work, I had found these images, which obviously the similarities between this body adornment, this necklace, to the work that I had made, really kind of stood out to me. And I think it's quite interesting that I feel like sometimes I will make work and I'll finish it, and then later on I'll keep learning about the work. It's quite interesting. I don't know. I think it's like, for me personally, it goes beyond coincidence. I think it speaks to the ties of our ancestors, and it kind of tells me that like the work that I have made really kind of like spoke to those ancestral remains. And the thing that really kind of like concreted that for me is when I started talking to Angela about the artwork going into the Dada Imaginary exhibition. I was looking at, okay, well, maybe I can revisit it and talk to kind of get an update from the Queensland Museum of how many remains were in there at the time. So last year, I think it was. And although there had been like a number of ancestral remains go out and a number come back in, the number still kind of sat around the same at the time. So I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. But the thing that really struck me is at the time, it was kind of like the changing of the guard. So the auntie that looked after the collections when I had made the work had retired, and it was a couple years between they had found someone to come in and look after the collections. And yeah, so I interviewed him, Danny Williams, and yeah, he had told me that the majority of the original 660 remains that I was told about at the Queensland Museum back in 2017, 18 were of Bachelor descent, which was quite like a powerful moment for me. Myself, obviously, being Bachelor. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's, you know, I think it goes beyond coincidence when something like that kind of happens, and it clearly is like ancestors trying to like speak to you and kind of sing out. So that was quite a powerful moment for me.
Thank you, Aidan. And perhaps that really does follow on, Natalie, from what you were talking about in terms of the paradox of the archive, I think was the phrase that you used, in terms of it being repellent and, you know, but also drawing you in. So, Aidan, we're just running out of time, but I just wanted to maybe flick to the last slide of your presentation just to show us very quickly what you're working on now. Great. These are light boxes using Excel spreadsheets. Is that right?
Yeah. So I guess just to continue on, I didn't think I'd be kind of working in the starter space, but during the pandemic, I started working more and more in like admin and kind of having to work with spreadsheets and PowerPoint and Word document and the Microsoft suite. And it really stood out to me how institutions and cultural institutions ask art workers, particularly First Nations art workers, to report on the successes and failures of a particular event or project in, I suppose, a quantitative kind of way. So, I think there was, I'm kind of like heading toward this space of looking at how Excel spreadsheet and the electronic spreadsheet has really kind of shaped the world we live in today. And I was reading an article which spoke about like the power of Excel spreadsheet and the way we collect data and the effect that it has on us today. Because, I mean, I think it'd be like quite hard to find something that has affected our culture more so than the electronic spreadsheet. Like the electronic spreadsheet, you change a 2 in a certain spreadsheet and markets collapse. Excel spreadsheets are used to lay people off and fire people, and used to justify leveling cities and committing all kinds of atrocities, but also kind of have built the society that we live in today. Used across business and institutions and used as a way of reporting. So I think I'm really interested in that kind of aspect of the ways in which data is used to report on the successes of like community-led projects, where the successes can't really be captured in diversity data, like looking at putting a 1 or a 2 in a column under Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or female, or are they from a regional area? That's kind of what I'm looking at.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Aidan, for your remarks and our discussion. It's been great to hear more about the context of that work. Thank you. Now I should probably hand over to Fiona and Tully. I'm sorry, we've gone a little bit over time.
Jump on here. I'm just wondering if we've got time for a question in the room, if there's anybody in the room with a question, or I'm looking up to Liz. Has anybody sent in through Slido? Anything in the room? There's just so much to take on. I thought they were an amazing suite of talks, linkages and ideas, from one to the other, picking up on those themes.
I've got
Okay, Tully.
So just a quick question. One of the things that I think came through all of those was the power of the surveillance of data to go both ways. So I think that came in every single one of those talks. And that I think that there's a moment of hope in that, as well as an obligation on our parts to think about how the rest of us can, how everybody can, non-artists can contribute to that function of looking back at the data that comes to us and questioning it. And I guess my question is, and great to see all of you on the screen there, fantastic, as well as the people in the room. I guess my question to everyone is, what's involved in that two-way surveillance? There are dangers in looking back. There's an obligation in what you do with the data that you collect when you do that, looking back at the surveillance and the point of data collection and the point of power of that data collection. And I just wondered if there were any reflections on that. I mean, Aidan, you used the word cultural safety. Nat, you certainly showed us some of the complexities of being in that space, of being the love and the hate of that, but the compulsion. So I just wondered if anybody had any observations on that, since all of you are doing that work in really useful and interesting ways.
Natalie?
That's okay, thank you. The compelling is real, I think, for all of us, actually, all of us who are doing this data, like all of the presenters here, we have this, it's the affect of the archive, the affect of the data that compels us to do something with it, to transform for the better, for the good, whether it be for our own mob, whether it be data to make better policy, to safeguard artists, to reveal and showcase and exhibit and all of that. For me, it is definitely a compelling, and there's a deep sense of responsibility that I feel not only to my own family but to our communities. Communities are white and black, all of us. I feel this deep sense of responsibility with the archives that I've had access to as a researcher. What's really interesting is that as a researcher with an academic hat, and I'm not devoid from my community in doing that, as an Aboriginal academic, we are not separate from the communities that we are working with and the other people around us are studying or researching. And so there is this real push-pull of being part of an institution of colonial power, really, colonial institution of power and representation and knowledge production. There's a real deep responsibility to our communities to do it in a way that really safeguards them and is for the, to repatriate. Well, I'm really interested in how now I've got all this data as a researcher. How do I repatriate it back to community? That's my responsibility, my obligation. These incredible letters, that I've got, surrounding me, I feel, the obligation is very deep and very real, and it's the next step of the project for me. I cannot give this up. It's not like this research is done, put it down, goodbye, close that archive box, move on to the next big idea. This has actually been with me for, decades, it feels, and it's going to be continuing on in different iterations and different forms, and repatriation is a big one, and all power to you, Aidan. That work is absolutely stunning and beautiful. And I just have to say, I took a group of young Aboriginal students, secondary students, with Simone Ter, and we were talking about the exhibition, and we showed them your work, and we didn't tell them what it was, and we'd seen Lola Greeno's gorgeous work in the beads, and then we moved to your work, and they just said, oh yes, more beads. And then we said, now come in close and tell us what you see. And the gasp was just palpable, and everybody was just really, it was very moving, very visceral. We just all went, the kids, they just were like, oh my God, is that skulls? is that human remains? And they got it straight away. You know, as year 8, 9 students in high school, they knew exactly what it was because that's what we've grown up with. So thank you. It's beautiful work.
I did have one other short point to make on that question. I see a nod, so I guess somewhere in the room my voice is being heard. But I think that there's something to say about creating a sense of safety around being the spokesperson about data as well, because I wonder if we all feel the same kind of nerve-wracking sense when we know we're about to communicate something that could be uncomfortable. We might be speaking to someone who hasn't yet absorbed that information. We're revealing this data to that community for the first time, and how to navigate those kind of relationships, which don't necessarily have to be uncomfortable, but I think that that's where like an interpretation or narratives attached to data are important to be built from a community, not just from singular data analysts.
And it does strike me, and perhaps we'll explore this in later panels as well, is the sheer interdisciplinarity of everybody who's presenting today and working within these different modes, as you say, Amy, of narrative modes or visual arts, performative, going through to design and you know, the actual science quantitative kind of work is really fascinating to me, and perhaps there's some of the answer within that. Yeah.
My question's for Elvis and Amy. Thanks so much for your presentation. So many of us who've been in the sort of culture arts sector for a long time would remember the work of Guerrilla Girls, who started counting representations of women in institutions in the US, and that work was extremely impactful. And obviously there are synergies there, but I just wonder if, taking the long view, you could sort of talk us through a little bit quickly, I guess, the gradations and differences in data that you're collecting. They were just putting up very bold statistics, but obviously your work is much more fine-grained, and I think that might be interesting for people to know.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think, yeah, exactly. Like prior to the first report that came out in 2016, I'd been running a blog, and like I was doing the kind of more sensational, worst case scenario kind of things, the way that blogs could be kind of a bit, media-ish and release information before we had the social media so much. And yeah, so the first report was about kind of trying to how do you take this seriously and actually use it as a measurement tool for change? Because I'd always been a fan of like 7 Up. Do you remember that Michael Apted movie where he went back and visited? So, going back and kind of, okay, well, it's kind of more about collecting the data to measure the change than to kind of, and
Amy, were you going to add? Yeah.
I was, yes. Had you finished, Elvis? I couldn't read your body language, yeah. And I think there's also the power rather than powerful of speaking back to an institution in languages that they do understand. It was so interesting to hear you speak about the Excel spreadsheet, Aidan, because I think that is where a lot of the effectiveness of Countess and the way that Countess presents data can be absorbed into institutional policies, because it is speaking in a similar visual, but also a similar like reporting kind of language.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I think unfortunately we have to wrap it up there, guys, and move on to the next session. So Fiona, do you have...
Just a big round of applause for all our speakers on that panel. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. We can't see what our speakers are seeing, so I hope you can see us. There's a lot of very happy faces. That was a really excellent way to kick off this morning. Thank you very much to all of you, but thank you particularly, Angela, for jumping in and, leading that so beautifully.